that actually brings me to introduce Konstantin, right? So he has a very long list of history as an expert. So I have something, I had to write it down, because he also especially flew in from England to do this presentation. He worked in international companies from Google to Microsoft and did over more than 1,000 research sessions. So that should already make him an expert, but he also is a co-founder of UXstudy.com. That is a UK-based company, and it actually focuses on building UX labs. So that's actually the topic for today. So without further ado, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was too much pressure. Yeah. So, first of all, first question. How many researchers do we have in the audience? 1, 2, 3, probably 5. Yeah, maybe. Okay, 5. 5.5. Okay, nice. I used to be a researcher. I think about myself as a researcher still. I used to have a small agency in Russia. Then I started to work for Google. I moved to London, where I worked for about 10 years as a researcher for Google. And then I left about 6 years ago, and we focus only on building usability labs. So I found myself as a kind of person, as a member of UX team, moving slowly away from UX, but kind of in their, you probably can call it research operations, research ops, or UX ops. So I can talk about what I do for too long, so your job, guys, is to stop me. Yeah. So what I'll try to do, I'll go through multiple steps and multiple kind of learnings for me personally as a UX researcher or UX designer, kind of finding myself in a slightly different area. And I'll try to go through multiple kind of steps as fast as possible, because we have about half an hour after that. So whatever resonates with you, please ask more about that specific topic. So let's just jump straight in. So first of all, why are we talking about infrastructure in general? Why is research ops or design ops is so popular right now? And it took me probably too long to realize that. Probably like 5 years working in my own company, doing the same thing. Then I started to understand why there are so many people looking at this area. And I think the reason is because the ultimate goal of any UX work is not to learn about users, right? It's not to build something beautiful. It's to help the development team, the product team, to implement whatever we do or whatever we learned about users in the product. That's the ultimate goal. If there is no connection between the product team or whatever we do, it's pointless. It can be absolutely perfect, it can be beautiful, or we can know everything we want, but it doesn't make any sense. So if we look at that connection between UX and the product team, if you look at how both teams work, there is actually a very big difference in terms of the product team. For example, software engineers, whatever they do, it's scalable, it's reliable, and there are tools for them. What I mean by that, for example, if there is a software engineer and let's say for 5 years, they work on the code, like they build the code, they have multiple libraries, the nature of how they work keeps everything organized. So they have a repository with all the code. If you want to find what happened, for example, 3 years ago, you know exactly where to go. You know who wrote the code, when, what the comments were, how it was accepted, and what bugs existed, and how it was fixed. Like it's just standard. Without that, it's impossible to write anything, right? Engineers in the room, please correct me if I'm wrong. Think about our part, user experience, especially user experience research. For example, if you conducted, or somebody in your company conducted a study half a year ago, where are you going to find that report? What team was the report for? What product it was? What happened after that report? Who other worked on the same product? Right? It's just impossible to find. In many cases, like a week or 2 weeks after something happened, it was kind of either implemented or forgotten. And in any case, it's written somewhere, it's uploaded either to the cloud or saved on some computer, and nobody knows where it is. And there is no connection between that piece of work and anything else. So that's the first difference. The second difference is software engineers work in a way that is scalable, which means that, for example, if there are two extra members of the team, they're going to read the code, and they're going to use exactly the same tools to upload the code in exactly the same way. They're going to write in exactly the same language. Everybody else can understand. And for example, if one of the team members leaves and then another joins, it's going to be absolutely scalable, right? It's not like that new person is going to change everything and starting writing in a completely different language. It's still going to be the same. Again, let's think about what we do in UX world, right? For example, if engineers work with UX designer or UX researcher, if there is a new designer or researcher, it's going to be a different person, probably using different tools, different methodology, interacting in a different way, saving all the things in different place, and writing reports and making assets in a completely different way. So it's not scalable. So that connection between the UX world and the development world I think is broken exactly for that reason. We cannot match the same requirements that are absolutely necessary for developers to make the product reliable, scalable, and usable. So whatever we do with infrastructure, this is exactly kind of the bridge we need to cross. We need to build first. And I think the difference is mostly not because we don't want to do that. It's because we don't have tools. We don't have infrastructure. Unlike software engineers, they have everything that they need to build that kind of scalable work. We don't have it. We're still working on that. That's why I think both UX research ops and design ops is so popular, and it's growing very quickly. And it's growing both in big companies like Google, Meta, or I don't know, Spotify, or in medium companies, small companies as well. It's just impossible to keep working seriously on the same product without making that the connection. And I think that's also the reason why still, when the product team is working on something, they're not necessarily called for designers or researchers. It's very often they ask for support or any help too late in the process. And I think the natural reaction from researchers and designers is to think that developers just don't know. We just need to teach them. We need to tell them again that, guys, we're here. Like, if something happens, come to us. We can build you beautiful things, and we can tell you about users. And I think I started my first study was probably like 25 years ago. Maybe 25 years ago it was the case. Developers didn't know. Now they do. I think the reason why they don't still come all the time is because they cannot embed UX part of the process into their product lifecycle, because it just doesn't fit, it doesn't meet the same requirements that is necessary for building that product. So that's the question why we're talking about the thing. I'm going to show a couple of examples of usability labs. Whatever we're going to discuss is probably applicable to UX infrastructure and research infrastructure in general, but as soon as we focus on UX usability labs, and I have a lot of examples, I can give specific, concrete kind of explanations and findings from that domain. This is probably one of the biggest usability labs in Europe. It's built for Pearson. It's the biggest educational company in the world, and they wanted to be able to bring the whole class into the usability lab together with the teacher and observe how they interact with each other, how they use devices. They want to be able to record and see from multiple angles. So there are multiple cameras embedded in the room. The whole idea you don't see them is because, you probably can see that one, is because we try to make the lab kind of as friendly as possible for people walking in. Like if you walk into the lab or to any place where you want to share your feedback as a user, you probably don't want to feel like you're in new studio with 5 cameras pointing at you, multiple people around, like a server rack sitting in the corner and doing something. And just to compare to something, this is probably the smallest usability lab we've built. It's built for British government department, and the observation room is just across the wall. It's probably even smaller than this one. There was a question about that people usually ask about building usability labs, is what included in the process. So there are multiple steps there. Please ask about specifics if you are interested in that. I'm probably going to skip this slide because there are too many things to cover in half an hour. But just to spend like 10 seconds on that. If you build a tool that helps make the work of UX people reliable and scalable, the tool in the process of building that tool needs to be reliable and scalable as well, which means that we need to standardize absolutely everything. And I think the best definition of a process I've heard is a process is something that you cannot forget. If you rely on your memory to do something, it's not a process. Like it's you trying to remember that. And we all forget stuff. It's going to fail. There is no way to fix that, and it's not a process. So when we build infrastructure for researchers and designers, we need a process for kind of providing efficient and reliable way of kind of dealing with all typical issues during the process. And then we can expect that, only in this case, I think we can expect that the result we get is going to be as reliable as we need. Okay, I'm going to skip that quickly and go to the next one. So I keep repeating of usable, scalable, and reliable. I'm going to give a couple of examples just to be as pragmatic as possible. Usable. I think a couple of examples can be. It's interesting that tools for designers and researchers, it's the only case when researchers or designers are users. We keep saying all the time that users are not, researchers are not users. In this case, researchers are users. And as users, we know that we cannot just ask to users and ask what you want and build exactly that. It just doesn't work like that, right? I think I feel myself guilty because when I worked for Google and people came to us asking what kind of lab we need, we completely forgot immediately everything we knew about research, and we said, yeah, of course we know what we need. We're experts, and here's the list. And whatever it was built, it never worked. And the next time, the next iteration happened, we can just give another list. So after starting to work on that kind of properly as a researcher, we conducted research almost like research on researchers to understand what actually is included in the process for interviewing people and trying to figure out what researchers needed. And just to give you a couple of tangible examples. For example, in terms of technology, a lot of things that we need in the lab, like for example, we need to be able to film from multiple angles, merge what we see, the video feed that we see of the user with the device, for example. We need to add audio playing on the device and audio from the room itself. We need to automatically process everything on the fly and kind of save or stream it to somewhere. The technical description is exactly the same that, for example, what happens in the TV studio, in the newsroom. So from the technical perspective, this is what we need, right? We need to have multiple video feeds. We need to combine everything. We need to just create picture-in-picture, and we need to stream it. The difference in terms of usability of the process is that in all setups where we have a typical audio-video kind of processing, we have a dedicated person sitting all the time, like focusing on that device and not doing anything else. In the research lab, we always have the most important task, which is talking to the user. Whatever we do with the lab, it's always secondary. And the lab needs to respect that. It's almost like driving a car. Like, for example, if that's a thing that works totally fine when you see it and look at the thing, if you install the thing in the car, and when it's crossing a busy road, you see, all you need to do is just, okay, I'll just quickly open that menu and choose that drop-down list and then confirm here and there. A lot of unexpected things can happen this time, right, in this moment. It's exactly the same process in the usability lab when we talk to participant and you can break the eye contact for like 2 seconds. So we actually did measure how long you can break the eye contact without kind of making it awkward. So you can look down to write something, but you need to look up again. Or you can look at the equipment, but again, you need to reestablish that connection. So, for example, for usability labs, we came up with a rule of 30 seconds. So every now and then, for 3 seconds maximum, you can look at something. Which means that whatever UI, whatever technology we build, it needs to obey the 3-second rule. Within 3 seconds, you look at something, you understand everything you need to understand about the lab. For example, is it recording or not? Is it streaming? Are there any questions from the observers observing your study right now, from the product team? If something doesn't work, you need to understand if it's critical, if you need to stop your study because it just doesn't work, or if something doesn't work but it's not kind of not disrupting the study, you need to quickly make a decision. Do you want to proceed or do you want to stop? So, which means that whatever technology we can borrow from the audio-video world, it just doesn't work because it's built for a completely different setup, for a dedicated user who just sits and does nothing else. Another interesting example from the 3-second rule was the one-click rule, which means that you probably all remember the old 3 clicks rule, is that if there are 3 clicks on the website to achieve something, it's probably too long. In this case, it's only 1 click, because 3 seconds means that you can look at the screen, you can understand what happens, and if you want to control something, you can press the button. That's it. You cannot, for example, select something, look at what you selected, and confirm that. It breaks the 3-second rule. It must be 1 click. Again, that means that whatever is built here, it just doesn't work. You need to basically recreate your both technology and how you organize and connect everything to be able to conduct a proper usability study, usability research. There are a lot of small details like that. It took us about probably 2 years to come up with a solution that actually works in terms of technology and how everything works together. If you need to build a lab, you probably don't need to spend 2 years, because there is a thing of threshold that you can, as soon as you cross the threshold, it's good enough. You don't need to build the best lab in the world, but even the threshold is pretty demanding. So one thing that we learned is, and I learned it the hard way when I worked for Google and people asked me what I need from a usability lab, and I thought, yeah, it's just 2 hours that I need to spend in one meeting, it will be done. Actually, it's full-time work for about 6-7 months. Because going back to that drawing earlier, the process of building a lab is not sitting in a meeting and describing everything you need. The process is talking to at least 5-6 teams in your company. It's like facilities, security, IT, procurement, legal, and probably somebody else. You don't even know what the team is, but you will know as soon as you start building the lab. Each team, they don't work for you. They have their own objectives and they have own metrics, how they evaluate everything. Like, for example, I just saw that at the meeting room here, the soundproofing is very good, and it's very non-typical. Like it's an exception. It's probably in 1% of the best room I've been to. In most of the meeting rooms, you can clearly hear what's going on in the other meeting room. And think about that. Like the meeting room is the most typical room that is built in corporations and big companies all over the world for the last how many? Like 70 years, and people still. And there is a team in your organization focusing on building meeting rooms. And every single time they build, the soundproofing is terrible. And again, it's not because they don't know what they're doing. It's because the task is very demanding. As soon as we started to build that, we realized that it's a boring story. I don't want to bore you to death, but building a soundproof lab, or soundproof anything, is extremely difficult. And as soon as the building is built, the room is finished, there is nothing you can do to fix that. You can spend probably a couple of millions and fix that, but nobody wants to do that. It's easy to rebuild the whole room, and nobody does that either because it's too expensive. So the process is very demanding, and the end of the process is very different from what you need to achieve in a lot of cases. Like, for example, if you build a meeting room, first of all, everybody knows what to expect. Like it's a screen with a table and a camera, right? And a couple of chairs around. It's easy. With a usability lab, you can have like a small usability lab that I showed or a huge one, and you need to decide what you need in the end. And characteristics of the lab are completely different. Like, for example, one of the things we learned is that, I'll show you a couple of examples later, is that the result of the usability lab, when you finish, it should be just the blandest, the simplest room possible. For people working in, there should be nothing exceptional about that. If you go into most of the usability labs, there is a rack server in the corner. Like it's pretty intimidating, and it's very loud. Like it's really loud, and it's very hot. So if you're locked in the same room like for 3-4 hours, you'll probably have a headache, and you will want to open the door. There are multiple cameras, and if you invite audiovisual company, for them, the more the better, because the more they sell you, the more you pay them, which means that they will install as many cameras if they can go away with, which is kind of counterproductive in usability case, because again, to start with, usability lab should be invisible, and that kind of contradicting requirement that you need a pretty complicated technology that's kind of embedded in the room and it's completely invisible, and it's built together with your own teams or external agencies that don't specialize on that kind of technology and they have completely different goals in mind. It's challenging. So we've never seen a lab that was built faster than probably like 8 months. A typical roadmap, despite we saw multiple companies saying in 2 months we'll have a lab, the typical roadmap is probably a year and a half for a good lab. A very quick example about scalability. So basically scalability means that we can grow whatever we do without growing the complexity. Because the biggest, it's a complicated thing. And it took me a while to understand that. The biggest kind of barrier to building products is complexity. It's kind of amount things we can put in the head of one person, right? Whatever you can think about, you can work on. Almost any products we're working on are too complicated to put in one head. That's the reason we need multiple teams. If it was possible to hire one person, like the smartest possible person on earth, to build one product, it would be much, much faster, much cheaper, and much easier to do that. It's just impossible. Like, for example, I remember when I worked in Google and I talked to the team that dealt with Google search, and it was like 2011 probably. One of the engineers said that they crossed the point when it was just physically possible to understand how the whole system works. They crossed that point multiple years ago. Nobody knows how the whole system works. It's just too complicated. Which means that when somebody says that, oh, big company does this for that reason, or there is this algorithm that works in a specific way, it's probably not the explanation because it's too complicated. Nobody knows actually how it works. So scalability means that we can hire more people who do things more than we do without kind of growing the complexity too fast. Because as soon as we reach the moment when the complexity is too high, so one person cannot do something, we stop. Like there's no way to move forward. And we need to pass information from one person to another one, and the kind of complexity stops that process. So I'll give a very tangible and very practical example of how it works in research infrastructure. When we realized that after we built technology, when we realized that the technology actually needs to work with real users, real researchers, and one of the limitations was that it was a rack in the corner. It was too loud and it was too intimidating to look at. It was like big metal thing sitting there, like producing a lot of noise and heat. We tried to figure out what can we do. So any standard solutions we saw, they didn't work. The standard solution is to buy a computer rack and install everything there and put fans, computer fans rack, they're designed for that. And they're even more loud and even more noisy, like, and produce a lot of heat outside of the rack. So that didn't work. Then we tried to figure out, can we put into an office kind of furniture and just to leave it there? It doesn't work because it becomes too hot inside and all equipment dies. So we started a probably 6-month-long experiment with trying to figure out if we can add fans around and have a cooling system and a cable management system and a power system inside that doesn't add a lot of heat outside, but allows all the equipment inside to be completely silent, kind of, and isolate put all the noise inside and locked inside without locking the heat inside. Again, it's a very boring story, but the result of that was we built. It's almost like office furniture. I think it's called office credenza, very fancy word. But outside it looks like office furniture. Inside you have multiple active fans that are silent, and I can cry with blood tears because it took me a while to figure out how to do that. It's absolutely silent, and it can cool down probably twice more equipment than we need. And again, twice more is because the third requirement is reliability. So when we build a system, and I think we learned very hard way, if we build anything for the usability lab, there always needs to be a plan B for absolutely everything. Like we take a, how's it called, mental X, and we just cut whatever piece of technology we have. And after we disable something, the whole thing still should work. Like there's always plan B and always a backup for absolutely everything. So including heating and including kind of power management as well. A couple of things about that. for scalability. So as soon as we realized that it can be a separate thing that can be put in any room, it added a lot in terms of kind of getting the same result regardless of what room it is, because all rooms are different, right? The configuration is different. Sometimes soundproofing is good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like weird corner shape, sometimes it's round-ish. And the standard way of building usability labs is to talk to your facilities and ask them to put cables under the floor from here to there. And it's just easy, right? It's easy, and it takes only probably like a week on paper, and in reality it takes probably like 7 months. Because the amount of paperwork you need to do that, and the amount kind of iterations you need to go through, is you don't want to know that. As soon as we have a standalone solution, we tested that, and we quickly realized that we never thought about kind of switching to standalone things that never touch anything, like any fabric of the wall, any fabric of the room. We quickly realized that that's a solution for usability labs for absolutely everything. We don't need to talk to any internal or external teams. You just install everything, and it works out of the box everywhere, regardless of what room you have. And if you want to move, for example, usability lab from one room to another room, you don't need to start the same process of talking to your facilities for another 6 months because you want to have that fun just in a different room. You just move the furniture there, and that's done. A couple of things that we didn't expect here. There are so many different characteristics here that kind of I, as a researcher, never wanted to learn. Like, for example, apparently, there are floor boxes everywhere with all the electrics and all the connections, and it's a standard floor box, which means that you need to be able to open it to connect something, and most of the office credentials are too low. So if you put them into a floor box, it just doesn't open. So you need to raise it a specific level. If you don't need it to very high, but you don't want it very low. Or, for example, we quickly realized that during research, researchers want to double check what exactly they stream and what exactly their observers want to see, right? Because as we kind of talked in the beginning, we don't work for ourselves, we work for the product team. We want them to see the best angle and the best feedback from the users, right? Which means that we need a screen to be able to see what your observers see. At the same time, we have a participant sitting in front of us who probably doesn't want to see, and we don't want that person to see whatever we stream to the other room. So we conducted a lot of tests, and one of the things we learned was if we put a screen on a movable kind of arm on top, you can always put it in the corner, kind of at the angle that you can see that the participants can't. Again, we started to build that only because we realized that after there is a kind of an anchor in our room that we can control, everything else on top of that belongs to researchers, not to facilities or security, or not to IT people or AV team. It belongs to the UX team, so we can build on top of that. Another thing we quickly realized is you never know what kind of room you get, and you have zero control over that. It's up to facilities. They just give you a room. It's a best case scenario. The standard case scenario is you don't get a room because everything is already occupied. So you just cannot complain. So, for example, if the room is too dark or too bright, too loud, or looks like an office, it doesn't matter. You need to change that, and you cannot touch anything because, again, paperwork for changing anything that changes the fabric of the space is a nightmare. So one thing we quickly learned that small things like lighting, for example, can change the look and feel of the whole room very quickly. So we did experiment with changing lighting on the same, again, that storage unit, because we can control that, which means that we can control whatever we want. We don't need to change the other room. Right now, we're working on a couple of things that we haven't launched yet. And it's amazing how much we can learn from talking to researchers and to existing clients. And there are a lot of things that I've been working as a researcher for like more than 20 years. So I thought that I know what can be done. I have no clue. Like, for example, one thing that completely kind of caught me off guard was when building spaces for UX teams, one thing we learned was that the more whiteboards you have around, the better. Like, you cannot have enough whiteboards. Like, whatever, yeah. If you can add one more, please do, it will help. That also means that in most of the cases, if that rule is taken to extreme, you have just a white space around, right? In some cases, you don't need a white space. For example, if you conduct a study in a home environment, you need a low table, kind of a sofa, maybe a TV screen in front of that, and we don't have white homes, right? We need to change the outlook. So one of the clients asked if we can quickly change kind of pictures on the wall, again, without touching the fabric of the wall. And after experimenting, we figure out that we actually can. As soon as everything is whiteboards and we make all the whiteboards magnetic, we can print out pictures on magnetic pieces of kind of soft material. So you can quickly apply any theme, any color you want, and you can change it like within a minute, literally. So for example, if you want to conduct a study on the go, you can put pictures around of a train, for example, or people sitting in the bus and reading. Whatever context you want to create, you can make it within minutes, and it doesn't change anything. I probably need to quickly wrap up. Another thing that was completely unexpected for me as a researcher was I always thought that building a lab is working, or any infrastructure is working on physical things, right? You need to build something, you need to bring it, install, connect, and you press the button, it either works or doesn't work. What I always missed was it's actually the whole life cycle from planning the thing, helping to implement the thing, helping with all the paperwork and bureaucracy, building the thing, and then making the thing working on day 100, not just on day 1. Meaning that to work on day 100, it means you need the whole support and you need the whole process of what, for example, happens if something is broken. Like if cable is broken, what was going to happen? We're going to take that cable, and what kind of cable it was installed. So we quickly learned that, first of all, in most of the cases, if you go to any usability lab, nobody has any drawings of that place. It was just built. Like it was built, and on day 1, somebody pressed the button, like, hey, so look, it works. Right? Our work is done here. We can turn around and leave. And then on day 5, you come into the lab, and you press the button. If something doesn't work, it's your problem now. The best case scenario, again, if you work with a support team, they can send someone who can investigate what's going on there. But the process of building the lab is kind of by nature is different from the process of building most of the spaces. So for a meeting room, you don't need a drawing, right? Even though all meeting rooms are different, you can go into the room. If something, for example, is broken, you can spend like 3-4 hours figuring out what is broken, and then if it takes another, day or 2 to fix that, it's fine, because the cost of failure in a meeting room is low. You can either go to another meeting room. You probably have like a dozen here in this building. Or you can conduct a meeting in a different place. It doesn't kind of break the flow. In a usability lab, you probably don't have a second usability lab. If you do, it's probably taken for something else. It's occupied. The cost of failure is extremely high. And again, we're not talking the cost of failure of even the salary of researchers or how much we pay the participants. We're talking about the missed window of opportunity to improve the product. And if the company values UX research, if they believe that UX research or UX design actually adds a value to the product, this is what we are talking about. And that's, for any company, it's a percentage of profit. And that's a huge number. Like it's not even close how much we pay to researchers or how much we pay for the office. It's much, much, much higher. Which means that if we are talking about risking that amount of money, the requirement to reliability and to the process is extremely high. It's much higher than anything else in the office in most of the cases, at least in most of the rooms. So one thing that was missing in most of the cases when we worked with companies, and that you need to take into account if you build a lab, is that you need to think about everything that eventually goes wrong, and you need to have a plan for absolutely everything. Like, for example, if you teach all researchers and all product managers how to use the lab, and product managers how to bring the product team into the observation room, how to set up that experience of observing how users give you feedback. What happens if the product manager leaves? Who is going to teach that person, the new product manager? Or what's going to happen if there is no product manager for a month until the HR team can find another person? What happens if you hire, for example, if you grow very quickly and you hire another 3 researchers? Who is going to teach them? So all those kind of service parts of the product, of the whole life cycle of the usability lab, and all of kind of helping the product team to learn from users that are not tangible, are not physical. It's the service part. That's a part of the reliability, scalability as well. The last thing I'll probably skip because it's extremely boring. It's about reliability, and I was going to explain how we built the cheapest, simplest part of any technology possible. It's a cable. It's basically bloodstream of any technology. And it's the simplest part because you can just go on Amazon. For example, we are talking about HDMI cable, like 3-meter HDMI cable. This is exactly what we need to do. We used the small cameras, and they needed 2 cables for power and for HDMI. All you need to do is to get 2 3-meter cables, connect them, and kind of glue them together somehow. Because when researchers or users kind of move their camera slightly, you don't want the cables to be different size, because otherwise you first break one cable, the longest one, then you shortest one, then you break the longest one. You need the pressure to be applied on both cables simultaneously, kind of helping each other. It took us about 7 months to solve that simple problem. And okay, like 20 minutes history of that pain. First of all, if you go to Amazon and search for example, HDMI and power cable, and search for 3-meter cable, and if you buy 20 cables from different manufacturers, I can guarantee you 2 things. So first of all, the length of every cable is going to be different, and none of them is going to be 3 meters. It's mostly, I think, because some companies measure from end to end of the cable, sometimes the existing cable. Sometimes they measure the cable itself, and they cut the cable and they attach the ends there. Sometimes they measure the cable in inches, and 6 inches is almost 3 meters, but not quite. Sometimes they just don't care. Like, it's roughly 3 meters. They cut kind of a sample first, and then they use a sample for like roughly, yeah, that's about that much. That was the first problem. So we literally bought like 60 cables and put them in a very boring spreadsheet and tried to figure out like what the length of one cable matching the length of another cable. So we found a match. It wasn't obviously 3 meters, it was like 2 meters 96 centimeters. So then was another problem, is that if you buy the same cable from the same manufacturer in a month, it's probably going to be a different cable. Because they don't care. And for our consumer market, it just works, right? If you need to connect your TV, for example, to your player, it's going to work. You don't care. Then it's not only like a different cable in terms of the length, it's probably going to be different cables in terms of the standards they can support. And now cables are very complicated. Like, it's not just wires on one end and wires on the other end. There is a chip inside that converts and checks the signal and makes a complicated handshake, so all the equipment on both sides can understand what they talk to. So that's another problem. The third problem is that when you want to glue that cable together, there is a kind of industrial sheathing you can put inside, and you quickly learn that if you just put 2 cables side by side, if the sheathing is too wide, it doesn't protect. If it's too narrow, it just breaks the cable, because the cable becomes too stiff, and as soon as you move it, it just breaks. The protection breaks the cable. So you need to figure out what kind of sheathing you want to use. And then you figure out that when you store the cable, you want to coil it in a specific way. And it's like the most boring thing ever, like coiling the cable after your usability study. But if you don't, your cable breaks, and your usability lab doesn't work for the next one. For the next study. So you need to learn how to coil the cable. And to coil the cable, apparently, you need to twist cables a little bit when you put them into sheathing. Otherwise, you just don't want to coil. And so on and so on. And eventually, we made the cable. It literally took us 6 months. And when we tested usability of that thing, it was so funny, because when we realized that we need to color code all the cables. Because, for example, if in the middle of the study, any cable is broken, the lab you build, the ideal situation is that it needs to self-diagnose itself. It needs to actually learn that, okay, it needs to check all the cables all the time, and it needs to, within those 3 seconds window, tell researchers what is broken, so researchers can quickly fix that. So if it tells you, for example, that specific cable is broken, they need to point that specific cable somehow, and there are like dozens of cables in the lab. So we decided to color code everything, so it can tell you, if you just replace the green cable, you take the new green cable, you connect to the green output to the green camera, and it works. So when we started to test, the cable itself, it's sold by a company with a blue logo. So we put it in a green sheathing. It was totally green. the green Velcro around, and we asked researchers, okay, what cable is that? And they were like, blue. Why blue? Oh, because there's a blue logo there. Okay, so we covered the logo with a green thingy on top. Green cable with a great green Velcro connected to a green output and the green camera. There was a green kind of sticker on the camera as well. So after that, when we asked the researchers what kind of cable is that, the answer was like, of course it's green. Like, what's a silly question? And we were like, phew, okay, 6 months, done. we did that. Again, this is the most boring, the most typical, and the most kind of simple question you can have in the lab. I think the takeaway from me was that starting to build a lab as a researcher, after conducting literally thousands of sessions in all labs across the world, I thought that there are a lot of kind of solved problems. You just need to buy that, or you need to learn from a person who already solved that, and that's done. Actually, the reality is that if you build a lab, you're going to have a lot of fun realizing how to solve very boring problems that were never solved before for some reason. I think that's it.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
Next.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, now it's time for questions. There's already a nice slide over here. So if anyone has already burning question or anything that you want to ask the Konstantin,
So I have a question. So I'm someone who's working in a smaller team, and how we typically book usability sessions is that any available meeting room. So do you have, because we'll have to convince a lot of stakeholders saying the value of it, it also involves budget. So is there any like a DIY version or any way where smaller teams could implement something like this?
That's a very good question. So basically the question was, let me know if I get it right. In a small team on a budget, how to take advantage of any principles of building larger labs on just building that infrastructure. So I think for me, the first unexpected learning from kind of my journey was that I never realized why companies have a lab in the first place. And I always thought that it's just to make their researcher life easier. It's actually the opposite. It's to simplify bringing the product team to as close to the participant, to the user as possible. Because the easiest way, the easiest solution for all that, we can just rent a lab from an agency. It's going to be terrible. I think it's a different, separate story, and if you want to know, I can go into that. But for you as a researcher or designer, it's probably the easiest solution. You just don't need to deal with anything I just described. You just go to someone, and it's their problem now. You just pay them for that. The problem is that it's pretty difficult to take developers or product managers working in this office, for example, and bring them even across the road. Like I don't know why, but it takes some time, and it's very difficult. If you can bring them to a meeting room, which is going to be difficult as well, and you know that probably, right? You need to persuade them, and they try to escape all the time. You need to lock the room. That's the main advantage of conducting a study in-house rather than going somewhere. And if we'll think about that, that means that any way we can kind of make their experience of the product team more kind of firsthand, the better we do our job, the better kind of the UX infrastructure and the process that you create works. So a couple of things that don't require a lot of budget. So first of all, it's interesting how the whole experience of observing the real user works. I don't know the statistics right now, but even a couple of years ago, most of the developers never seen real users working with their product, ever. Like in their life, never. So just the fact of being able to observe someone helps, but there is a kind of very subtle difference between observing recording and observing it in real time. I don't know what the difference is, but there is. It's like a difference between watching a TV and going to the theater. It's exactly the same picture, right? You can record exactly the same thing, put on a very high definition TV screen, and you'll see the same thing. But it feels different way, right? It feels different because you see a real person in front of you, and the empathy probably works in a slightly different way. So whatever you can do to make that gap even smaller, Like, for example, what I did in Google, I started to conduct studies with one condition. If you want me to conduct a study for your team, you need to have one person from the product team who sits with me in the usability lab, not even in the observation room, in the usability lab. And to start with, it was like the scariest thing possible for developers. But then they started to enjoy that a lot. It took them probably like 2 months to realize that it actually helps a lot. And to develop some skills, not to interrupt participants, for example, saying like, no, you're doing it wrong, just press this button. But in the end, what I saw was, it was much easier for me to to bridge that gap between research or design and developers. Like, for example, there was one case when, I think it was the Android team in London, where we tried to persuade developers to change one thing, and we did that. It took us probably like 3 months to do that. So for months, we kept saying, like, there is an issue with onboarding process. Just users cannot understand how to use a specific feature. So before changing anything else, we need to fix that. And developers were like, yeah, we understand that, but we have an issue with latency, and there is another bug that we need to fix. It went until I brought one of the developers in the usability lab, and he sat with me for 1 hour, and he went to his team saying, guys, just our system doesn't work. And everybody was like, yeah, okay, we will fix that. And I thought, what the hell? It took me 3 months to say exactly the same thing, but the same words coming from their own kind of member, somehow it makes a difference. So bringing a member of the product team to the usability lab can be useful. It can be challenging as well, but useful too. Bringing everyone in the product team together is a challenging and useful thing as well, because you probably know that the typical objection to observing a user is that, oh, I can do it from my desk. Just send me a link and I'll watch the feed. What actually happens is people do something else. Like, I'll check the email, I'll try to code a little bit. On the second screen, there will be participant talking. And it's not the same thing as seeing the real person and observing in real time and kind of feeling the same with that problem. Another benefit of putting people together is that in most of the cases when I conducted a study with people observing in the usability lab. When I finished the study and I told them that, oh, I'll send you a report within a week, they said, we don't need a report. We already know the problem. We already know the solution. We're going to the desk right now just to start working the solution. So bringing people together gives that benefit. But again, you probably need to work with a product manager to make that happen. It's kind of your goal aligns with the product manager goal, who wants to fix things quickly, and your PM is probably your best ally in this case. A couple of extra examples. I think the first, yeah, okay, last one, and then we can switch. Okay, nice. I think one of the takeaways for me personally is that technology for UX research is very complicated because, again, it needs to meet all the requirements. So if you have a limited budget, don't focus on technology. Don't try to solve the problem of unreliable stream or bad audio. It will require at least like probably 50,000 euros to solve that, at least in the best case scenario. So if your budget is smaller than that, focus on something else. Focus on the experience of the observers rather than the researchers.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can I ask one?
Yeah, of course.
So I'm just a little bit curious about the 3-second rule that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking in my head that if you give 3-second time to a user to make a decision, so maybe you are pressurizing the user. And in that way, if that's true, that means they are giving an answer in a big pressure that they have. And if it's also true, that means you have a lot of errors that you're collecting from them instead of getting the right answers. And if it's also true, then how you validate those results that you're getting from them?
That's a very good question. So the question, as far as I understand, is does the 3-second rule result in more stress on the user side, which can result in more errors and all negative results? So I think the complication here is that if we look at the research session, during the research session, we actually did ask researchers how they feel in most of the cases. We sent a survey asking what kind of state researchers were in, what feelings they have, and so on. So number one was stressful. it's a very stressful process. Like, you need to talk to a person, you need to keep like 20 things in your head, everything can go wrong. You have zero control over your technology or over the prototype, of the user, and of the observers. And you need to kind of to juggle everything without dropping a ball. At the same time, before the study, you can come to the lab, for example, 1 hour before the study, you can prepare everything. You're not in a hurry. Kind of in that moment, kind of that period of time, you have all the time in the world. You can go on the previous day, for example, and prepare everything. So the 3-second rule, it helped us a lot to understand that a lot of things that researchers need, they can actually prepare in advance. Like, for example, if you conduct a study, you probably know what kind of methodology you're going to use. It can be A/B experiment. You need to have 2 devices, so you'll need probably user-facing camera to figure out the human expression. You need feed from 2 devices. You probably want to put them side by side to be able to compare. And you probably need another camera filming the hands, because sometimes people click on something that is not clickable. So if you only take the feed from the device, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens. Like, you want to catch that clicking. So you need 2 cameras and 2 feeds from the devices. Between that and just interview, you want to probably switch just to user-facing camera, just the user, right? So in technology you build, you probably want to be able to select what kind of combination of video sources you want in advance. You don't have like all the 300 options, and then you 3 seconds you need to quickly realize what you want. You want to exclude everything and leave only, for example, 3 you need for your specific study today. And then within 3 seconds, if you want to switch, you're switching between 3, not 300. So that helps a lot. Another thing that we realized after a lot of testing was, if you separate a screen and if you have a status bar that is always the same, regardless of where you go, it can be the first page of your application, can be switching, it can be debugging, and so on. But the status bar is always in the same place. Sooner or later, researchers kind of learn how to use that. And if you have a summary kind of health status of your lab, it's a green light if everything goes right. And if it's green, you don't need to think about anything else. So if you want to change the status, you know where to look. It's in the same place. It's been in the same place for the last 3 years. And if it's green, done. So adding up those small kind of tricks and solutions, combined together, they can fit you into the 3-second rule.
So that means that kind of method is only applicable if you have a large lab or you have a good setup. But if you are a small team, or maybe you are a hybrid UX designer that also doing an end-to-end process, so means that this kind of process is not really applicable.
It's a good question. So if in a smaller lab, if you don't have all the technology and all the time to experiment and to update everything, I think we come to one of the most important questions within the organization, which is budget. If you can go to someone in your organization and prove that spending another $500,000 on that lab, on the improving experience, is worth it, you suddenly don't have that problem, right? you have all the money in the world. You can fix that. And budget is extremely kind of complicated because it's not only like a financial thing, it's a political question as well. It's a question of power, it's a question of history and social connections, and what is seen as the priority for the organization this year or this quarter, or how often and what kind of stakeholders are involved and so on. And I think, just to make it quick, there are 3 things to look at the budget for UX teams specifically. The first one is you figure out how much you spend on the UX team. Like, you put the salary together, and that's it. That's your answer, right? It's the easiest to calculate. But it also shows you how much you spend. It doesn't show you how much you make. So to have a bigger picture, you need to figure out, so in a big company, the general kind of rule of thumb is your salary, for example, $50K, the company actually spends on you about 2-3 times more. Because they need to hire you, they need to have a HR team, they need to have a legal team, you need to have a manager, right? If you, for example, if your manager has 5 people, then 20% of the manager's salary is the cost of you as well. And that manager has a manager as well. So 1/5 of that manager's salary goes to you. That goes to the CEO. So part of the salary of the profit of CEO is the cost of you as the employee. So if you put that together, the number is going to be completely different. And that's kind of the second approach. But again, that's the cost. It's not the profit. So to look at the profit, it's the least kind of calculatable thing, but I think the most important. So if you look at the organization, I have no clue what company you're working on, but if you needed to have a guess, what percentage of kind of value of the product of your company comes from a better user experience rather than your competitors? So, for example, if one day your competitor has much better user experience, will your company still have a chance on the market? What do you think?
It will be more difficult.
More difficult, like just a little bit more difficult, or like really difficult? So if we are very conservative, and we say, like, for example, 20% of their profit inside the organization comes from user experience, and if we lose, for example, 20% of competitive edge, if our competitor has better user experience, then probably that's how much user experience contributes to your organization. And if you take that as kind of your cost of user experience in general, if we had, for example, again, I don't know what company you're working for, but let's assume that you have the best possible infrastructure in the world for you. How much would it improve your work as a designer or researcher? Just give any number. I don't know, it's difficult to say, but...
Here's the mic.
like 1% or...
Maybe less than 10%.
Less than 10%, let's say 5%, right? So we took 20% of the profit of the company, and 5% of those 20% is the cost of your infrastructure. This is the real cost. It doesn't matter how much you pay for the equipment, what's the budget of facilities, what's the budget of your manager. This is the real cost. If you don't build the infrastructure, this is how much the company loses. So if you find the right person inside the organization who sees the whole picture and who is interested in that 5%, not in the power battle between multiple departments for a limited budget, but in like real tangible outcome of the business, this is the real cost. And before the talk, I quickly checked banks in Amsterdam, and I think one is called Rabobank. So last year they made 3 billion euros as a profit. And they have about, I think, a couple of hundred people. So I assume if they have, let's say, 500 people as employees or 300, the UX team is probably like 20, 30 people, right? So they probably have one usability lab. So 20% of 3 billion is 600 million, and 5% of that is how many millions? $30 million, 30 million euros. So per year. This is the real cost of your UX infrastructure, 30 million. It's not how much your manager gave you, right? And if you think about that, everything else is much easier. Like, it doesn't matter how much the specific company that you're working with is taking. Like, it's not saving 5,000 euros on this, on that. Like, it's not even close to that number. You're working with 30 million euros per year per your product. But again, it's a real figure, but it's very, very difficult to have that battle, because you need to find the person who sees that real figure.
Yeah. Okay, like a big applause to you, because yeah, we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you.